The steam from my coffee cup was still rising when Rachel shattered my life. She did not ask for permission. She simply announced, "I am selling your house to buy a new car for my husband. 30 years of hard work traded for a luxury vehicle." She checked her watch, indifferent to my shock. "You have 3 days to pack," she added. It was not a request. It was an eviction notice from the child I raised. My name is Eleanor Whitman. I am 56 years old. For the last 22 years, I have navigated the silence of this house alone, ever since the day the police officer knocked on my door to tell me my husband would not be coming home from the construction site. We live in a small town on the edge of Lake Michigan, where the winters are long and the people are generally private. This 2-story wooden house was not an inheritance. It was not a gift. It was the physical manifestation of 30 years of my life spent working as an administrative manager at a private research institute. I filed papers, managed egos, and saved every single dollar so that I could own these 4 walls. My daughter, Rachel, sat across from me at the kitchen island. She is 34 now. She has her father's eyes, but none of his gentleness. She married Mark 5 years ago. Mark is a man who wears expensive suits he cannot afford and speaks loudly about business ventures that never seem to materialize. He has failed at 3 startups in the last 4 years, yet he walks with the confidence of a CEO. It was a Tuesday morning in late October. The air outside was crisp, and the leaves were just beginning to fall, covering the lawn I would usually rake on the weekend. The kitchen smelled of the dark roast coffee I was brewing. It was peaceful. I had no idea that the ground beneath my feet was about to dissolve. Rachel did not touch the coffee I placed in front of her. She was scrolling through her phone, her expression tight. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were hard, devoid of the warmth I used to see when she was a child. "Mom, we need to talk," she said. The tone of her voice made my stomach turn. It was the tone she used when she needed money. But this felt heavier. "Is it Mark?" I asked. "Is he okay? Mark is fine?" she said, her voice sharp. "Better than fine. Actually, he has a massive opportunity in Detroit. It is going to change everything for us. But he needs to look the part. He needs a new car, a luxury import. The investors need to see success before they buy into it." I sipped my coffee, confused. "That sounds expensive. Rachel, I don't have that kind of money to lend you right now." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a dry, brittle sound. "I didn't ask for a loan," she said. She placed her hands flat on the granite countertop. "I sold the house. Mom, the closing is on Friday." My hand shook, and hot coffee splashed onto my wrist. I stared at her, unable to process the words. You sold what?" I stammered. "This is my house." "Rachel, technically, no," she replied, her voice eerily calm. "It is my house. Remember 3 years ago, when you were worried about your heart? We signed the transfer of deed. You signed it over to me. I told you it was to protect you, to make sure the state couldn't take it if you ended up in a nursing home. To take care of you." The memory hit me like a physical blow. The stack of papers on the dining room table, her reassuring smile, the way she had held my hand and told me she just wanted me to be safe. I had signed. I had signed because I trusted her more than I trusted myself. I had signed because she was my daughter. I looked around the kitchen. I looked at the window frame I had sanded and painted last summer. I realized with a terrifying clarity that I was a trespasser in the home I had built. "I am selling your house to buy a new car for my husband. You have 3 days to pack," she said. The sentence hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. It was not a negotiation. It was a command. 3 days, I whispered. Rachel, this is my home. Where am I supposed to go? She stood up and checked her watch. She did not look at me. She looked through me. You are resourceful. Mum, you always figure it out. Mark needs this car. It is an investment in our future. You're sitting on equity that is doing nothing. She turned and walked toward the door. I sat there, frozen. The feeling of betrayal was not a hot, fiery rage. It was cold. It was a deep, paralyzing chill, like falling into the lake in the middle of January. I did not scream. I did not chase after her. I sat in the silence she left behind. But as I sat there, the shock began to recede, replaced by a strange clarity. My mind began to race backward, connecting dots I had ignored for years. The jewelry that had gone missing 2 Christmases ago, the cash I thought I had misplaced in my purse, the times she had asked for my banking passwords to help me set up autopay. I was 56 years old. I was a widow. And in 3 days, I was going to be homeless. But as I stared at the coffee stain on the counter, I realized the story was not over. It was just beginning. The kitchen was silent. The only sound was the refrigerator humming, a sound that had been the background noise of my life for 15 years. I looked at the chair where Rachel had just sat. The ghost of her perfume lingered. It was expensive perfume. I wondered if I had paid for that, too. My mind drifted back, not to 3 days ago, but to 22 years ago. The day the foreman called me. A crane accident. Quick. Painless, they claimed. I was 34 then, the same age Rachel is now. I remembered looking at her at the funeral. She was 12 years old, holding my hand so tight her knuckles were white. I made a vow to her then. I would be both father and mother. I would be her shield. There were men who came around later. Jim, a kind man from the library. Robert, who owned the hardware store. They asked for coffee. They asked for dinner. I turned them all down. Rachel had looked at me with those big, fearful eyes and asked, "Are you going to get a new husband?" "Mom, no. Sweetie," I had told her, brushing her hair back. "It is just you and me. Always." I kept that promise. Every bonus from the institute went into her college fund. I wore the same winter coat for 7 years so she could go to the private university she dreamed of. I remembered the day she graduated. She wore a white dress. She looked like an angel. I stood in the back, clapping until my hands stung, thinking that this was it. This was my masterpiece. I had raised a strong, educated, beautiful woman. Then came the scare. 3 years ago. My heart had started fluttering wildly in my chest, shortness of breath. The doctors used words like atrial fibrillation and stress markers. I was terrified, not of dying, but of leaving things messy for Rachel. She had come over that Sunday. She brought lasagna. She poured me tea. She was so gentle then. "Mom, you know I love you," she had said, her voice soft and trembling. Mark says, "Well, he says that if something happens, the government taxes on inheritance are terrible. They could take the house to pay for medical bills. I don't want that to happen. I want to preserve what you worked for." I looked at the documents she placed on the table. They were thick and full of legal jargon I did not fully understand. "It is just a formality," she had assured me, squeezing my hand. "You keep living here forever. Nothing changes. It just means It means I can take care of you without the courts getting involved. Please. Mom, let me help you. I saw tears in her eyes. I saw a daughter terrified of losing her mother. I did not see a predator. I did not see a contract. I saw love. Okay, I whispered. Where do I sign? I signed my name. Eleanor Whitman. With that ink, I signed away my safety. I did not call a lawyer. I did not ask for a clause guaranteeing me life tenancy. Why would I? You get contracts to protect yourself from strangers, from enemies. You do not get contracts to protect yourself from the child you nursed through chickenpox. You do not build legal walls against the person who lived inside your body. Now, the memory of her gratitude that day felt like a knife twisting in my gut. She had hugged me so tight. She had said, "Thank you. Mom, you won't regret this." I sat alone in the house I no longer owned. The sunlight shifted across the floorboards. I had refinished those floors myself on my hands and knees. I realized that my love had been my blindfold. I had given her everything because I thought we were on the same team. I thought we were playing the same game. But Rachel had been keeping score differently all along. I closed my eyes. The image of her cold, indifferent face from this morning overlaid the memory of her sweet smile from 3 years ago. How did I not see the greed hiding behind the concern? How did the child who used to cry when she stepped on a bug turn into a woman who could evict her mother for a car? The silence of the house gave me no answer. I stared at the empty cup in front of me and asked the question that would haunt me for the rest of my life. What did I miss? I stood in the shadows of the hallway, a cardboard box folded flat in my hands. The front door opened, and the air pressure in the house changed immediately. It was not a homecoming. It was an inspection. Rachel walked in first, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floors I had polished for decades. Mark followed her, tapping furiously on his phone. He did not look at the entryway. He did not look at the photos of his wedding day that still hung on the wall. He looked at the ceiling, calculating. The agent says if we stage it right, we can list it by Monday, Rachel said. Her voice was clipped, devoid of the familiar cadence I used to know. But we need to get rid of all this clutter. It makes the rooms look small. She gestured vaguely at the living room, at the armchair where my husband used to read the newspaper, at the piano she had learned to play on. Clutter. Mark shoved his phone into his pocket. The dealership called me back. They have the model I want coming in from Chicago. Obsidian black. Heated steering wheel. It is the only way to make an impression in Detroit. Rachel, if I pull up in the Honda, the deal is dead before I even open my mouth. I know, Mark, Rachel replied, walking into the kitchen and running a finger along the counter to check for dust. The equity from this place covers the down payment and the lease for the apartment in the city. We just need the cash released. Fast. I stepped out of the hallway. They stopped, but they did not look guilty. They looked annoyed, like I was a stain on the carpet they had forgotten to clean. You are talking about my life like it is a line item on a spreadsheet, I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. Mark sighed, a loud, exaggerated exhale through his nose. He looked at Rachel, not at me. Is she going to be difficult? We don't have time for drama. Rachel, I have meetings to set up. I felt a cold snap in my chest. He did not say Eleanor. He certainly did not say Mom. I was a pronoun. I was a third-party obstacle. Rachel turned to me. Her face was a mask of impatience. It is not a spreadsheet. It is reality. This house is too big for one person. It is a drain on resources. Mark needs this car for his career. His career supports us. Therefore, the house goes. It is simple math. It is my home, I said. It is an asset, Mark corrected, finally looking at me with eyes that were as dead as marbles. And frankly, the decor is obsolete. That wallpaper, the oak trim. It screams the 1990s. We are going to have to paint everything white just to get a bid. Obsolete, I repeated. Look, Rachel said, checking her watch. We are not here to argue. We are here to measure the windows for the staging crew. Have you started packing the upstairs yet? The movers are coming to take the junk to the dump on Thursday morning. The junk. My life. Where do you expect me to go? Rachel, I asked. I waited. I waited for the daughter I raised to flicker behind those cold eyes. I waited for her to offer the guest room in her apartment. I waited for her to mention a rental she had found for me. She blinked. You are a grown woman. You have savings. Find a motel or call Aunt Sarah. I don't know. Just be out by Friday. She turned her back to me. She pulled a tape measure from her purse and handed it to Mark. Grab the other end, she commanded him. If we knock down this wall, the open concept will add 10,000 to the asking price. They began to measure the living room, talking over my head about square footage and curb appeal. They discussed the leather seats of the new car. They discussed the sound system Mark wanted. Not once did they look back at me. I was not a mother anymore. I was a tenant being evicted. I was a liability being liquidated. I turned around and walked back toward the stairs. I did not slam my bedroom door, but when I heard them leave 10 minutes later, the sound of the front door closing echoed through the house like a gunshot. It was final. The bolt clicked into place. They had locked me out of their hearts long before they decided to lock me out of my house. I stood by the window and watched them get into their car. They were laughing. They were already spending the money. The silence in the house was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. For 2 days. I moved through the rooms that had defined my existence, reducing 30 years of life into 3 suitcases. I did not pack the photo albums. They were heavy, and Rachel had called them clutter. I did not pack the ceramic tea set my husband gave me for our 5th anniversary. I left the books on the shelves. I left the quilts I had sewn by hand during the long winter nights when Rachel was a baby. I took only what was necessary: clothes, toiletries, my medication. The act of leaving was an amputation. I was cutting off parts of myself and leaving them on the floorboards to be swept away by strangers. On Thursday afternoon, I knelt beside my bed to check for anything I might have missed. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic, pushed deep into the corner against the wall. I frowned. I lay on my stomach and reached further, my fingers hooking around a rusty handle. I dragged it out into the grey light of the bedroom. It was an old metal document box, dented and covered in a thick layer of dust. I wiped the lid with my sleeve. I had not seen this box since before the funeral. I found the small key taped to the bottom, the adhesive brittle and yellow. I thought I threw you away. I whispered to the empty room. I turned the key. The lock clicked with a stiff resistance. Inside, the smell of old paper and mildew rose up. It was not money. It was paperwork. Stacks of carbon copy forms from the research institute where I had spent my youth. I flipped through them, my eyes scanning the faded typewriter ink, supplemental retirement and survivor benefit trust. The date at the top was from 25 years ago. I stared at it, my mind foggy. I vaguely remembered a meeting in a windowless office. A man in a brown suit talking about a pilot program for administrative staff. I had signed the papers, and then, in the chaos of my husband's death and the struggle to raise Rachel alone, I had completely erased it from my memory. The institute had been bought out a decade ago. I assumed this account, if it even existed, was dead. I held the folder in my hands. I felt nothing. No spark of hope, no excitement. To me, these were just ghosts of a past life, meaningless paper in a world where my own daughter could discard me like trash. Yet, I did not throw them back under the bed. I placed the folder into my tote bag. It was not logic that made me do it. It was instinct. It was the muscle memory of a woman who had learned to save everything, just in case. The rest of the time passed with agonizing slowness. The sun rose and set, marking the death of my life here. Wednesday bled into Thursday. Thursday faded into Friday. I slept on the mattress without sheets, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster that I would never fix. When Friday morning arrived, the house was echoing. It was stripped bare of warmth. I stood in the hallway one last time. I looked at the pencil marks on the doorframe where we had measured Rachel's height every birthday. Age 3, age 7, age 10. I reached out and touched the mark for age 12, the year her father died. "Goodbye," I said. My voice cracked, but no tears came. I was too hollow for tears. I felt dried out, like an old leaf waiting to be crushed. I placed the house keys on the kitchen counter. I did not look back. I picked up my suitcases and walked out the front door. The lock clicked behind me. I stood on the porch, a 56-year-old woman with no home, no family, and a bag full of old papers. I walked down the driveway toward the street, stepping into a future that had no name. I took the early bus to Grand Rapids. I did not want to walk into a bank in my own town, where the tellers knew my name and knew that I was currently sleeping in a cheap motel near the highway. The building I chose was a glass tower, an independent financial firm that looked intimidating and cold. That was exactly what I wanted. I did not want sympathy. I wanted answers. I sat across from a young associate named David. He looked barely older than Rachel. He held the yellowed papers from my document box with the tips of his fingers, as if they were fragile ancient artifacts. "Mrs. Whitman, this trust structure. We haven't seen this specific code in a long time," David said, adjusting his glasses. "The institute that issued this was acquired by a pharmaceutical giant 15 years ago. Most of these accounts were cashed out or rolled over. You said you never received a notice I moved houses after my husband died." I replied, my voice flat, and I wasn't paying attention to the mail back then. David nodded politely, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He turned to his computer. He typed for a long time. Then he stopped. He frowned and hit the enter key again. Harder this time. He picked up the phone on his desk. "Barbara, can you come to Station 4? I need an override code for the Legacy Archive." "Yes. Now." He hung up. The air in the small cubicle shifted. It became heavier, charged with a sudden electricity. A woman in a sharp grey suit walked over. She looked at the screen, then at the papers, and finally at me. Her expression went from professional boredom to stunned silence in 3 seconds. "Mrs. Whitman," the woman said. Her voice was significantly softer than before. I am Barbara, the senior account manager. Would you mind if we move to a private conference room? I think we need some privacy. I followed them. My heart did not speed up. I felt a strange detachment, as if I were watching a movie about someone else. We sat at a long mahogany table. Barbara typed a few commands into a laptop and turned the screen toward me. This fund was set up as a high-yield survivor benefit, Barbara explained. It was designed to compound aggressively to support widows of the research staff, because you never touched it. And because the acquiring company's stock split 4 times in the last decade, the interest has been substantial. I looked at the screen. I saw a string of numbers. I blinked. Is that right? I asked. Yes, Barbara said. As of this morning's market open, the total balance is $1,243,000.62. I stared at the number. $1 million. It was enough to buy my old house 4 times over. It was enough to buy Rachel's apartment building. It was enough to buy the silence that had surrounded me for the last 3 days. I expected to feel joy. I expected to feel relief washing over me like a warm bath. But I did not. I felt a cold, hard iron settling in my spine. I thought of Rachel selling my home for a car. I thought of Mark calling me obsolete. They had thrown me away because they thought I was a dry well. They were wrong. Mrs. Whitman, David asked tentatively, "Do you want a glass of water? You look very pale." "No," I said. I looked up at them, and for the first time in a week, I did not feel like a victim. I want to access these funds. Immediately. "Of course," Barbara said. "We can set up a transfer. What is your goal for this capital? We can offer investment portfolios, estate planning." "I don't need estate planning," I interrupted. "I need a lawyer, not a gentle one. I need someone who specializes in forensic accounting and family disputes. Someone who knows how to find things that people want to keep hidden." Barbara looked at me. She saw the bruising under my eyes and the cheap fabric of my coat. But she also saw something else. She saw the look of a woman who had nothing left to lose. She pulled a business card from her portfolio and slid it across the table. "This is Sarah Jenkins," Barbara said quietly. "She is expensive. But she is the person you call when you want to stop being polite. She is in this building, 3 floors up." I took the card. My fingers did not tremble. The gears were beginning to turn. I stood up. "Thank you," I said. "Transfer the funds." I walked out of the office. I was no longer just an evicted mother. I was a woman with a war chest. And I was about to go to work. Sarah Jenkins introduced me to a private investigator named Mr. Miller. He did not work out of a smoky basement. He worked out of a bright, minimalist office 2 blocks from the courthouse. I sat in a leather chair that was far more comfortable than anything I had owned in my entire life. And I wrote a check for the retainer. It was $5,000. A week ago, that sum would have terrified me. Now, it was simply the cost of doing business. "I am not asking you to ruin her," I told him, my hands folded calmly in my lap. "I am asking for the truth. I want to know where the money went. All of it. The loans, the gifts, the emergency funds I gave her over the last 10 years. Miller nodded. He was a man of few words. "I will dig until I hit bedrock. Mrs. Whitman. If there is a paper trail, I will find it." He found it. He found everything. 5 days later, I sat in his office again. A thick binder rested on the desk between us. Miller looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and tapped the cover of the binder with his index finger. Mrs. Whitman, you might want to prepare yourself, he said softly. The financial history here is extensive. I opened the binder. The first page was a summary of bank transfers. I traced the lines with my finger. I saw the dates. I saw the amounts. On November 14th, 2 years ago, I had transferred $3,000 to Rachel. She had called me, sobbing, claiming Mark had a dental emergency and they had no insurance. I remembered skipping my own blood pressure medication that month to make sure I had enough cash for them. I looked at the credit card statement Miller had attached to that date. Grand Resort and Spa. 2 nights. $3,200. There was no dentist. There was no emergency. There were massages and champagne. I turned the page. Last year. The urgent car repair she needed $1,500 for a designer handbag purchased at a boutique in Chicago. The money for the heating bill, a down payment on a jet ski rental for a weekend trip. Page after page, the lies unraveled. It was not just bad luck. It was a lifestyle. I had not been supporting a struggling young couple. I had been subsidizing a fantasy. I had been the silent investor in their illusion of success. They had bled me dry, drop by drop, and when the well finally ran low, they decided to sell the well itself. The total misappropriation of funds, if we count the loans she claimed were for emergencies, is nearly $45,000 over 7 years, Miller said. And that does not include the house transfer. I closed the binder. I did not cry. The part of me that could cry had died the day I walked out of my front door. Thank you. Mr. Miller, I said. Can I keep this? It is yours, he replied. What are you going to do with it? Confront her. No, I said, standing up. Not yet. I went back to the temporary apartment Sarah had helped me rent. It was clean and quiet. My phone sat on the coffee table. It buzzed relentlessly. Rachel had been calling. At first, the messages were annoyed. Mom, where did you leave the spare keys to the shed? Then, they became demanding. Mom, pick up. The movers are asking about the piano. But as the days turned into a week, the tone shifted. Mom, are you okay? Please call me. I am worried. I did not answer. I did not type a reply. I simply watched the screen light up, and then go dark. My silence was not passive. It was a weapon. For 34 years, I had been available. I had been the safety net. Now, the net was gone, and I could feel her panic rising through the digital void. She did not know where I was. She did not know I had money. She did not know I had the binder. I spent my evenings organizing the evidence. I categorized every lie. I matched every tearful phone call to a receipt for luxury goods. I was building a wall, brick by brick. This was not about revenge. Revenge is hot and messy. This was about accounting. This was about balancing the ledger. I was not going to destroy Rachel. I was simply going to let the truth do what it always does. I was going to let the weight of her own actions crush the glass house she had built. I looked at the calendar. The closing on my old house. Her house was scheduled for tomorrow. Mark would be expecting his money. Rachel would be expecting me to come crawling back, begging for a place to stay. I picked up my phone and finally dialed a number. But it was not Rachel's. Sarah, I said when the lawyer answered. I am ready. Send the letter. The courier delivered the heavy cream envelope to Rachel's apartment at 8 o'clock in the morning. By 10 o'clock. She and Mark were sitting across from me in the conference room of Sarah Jenkins' law firm. The room was soundproof. encased in glass that overlooked the grey city skyline. It was neutral ground, stripped of the emotional clutter of my living room. Rachel looked furious. She was wearing her oversized sunglasses, likely to hide the fact that she had not slept well. She threw the letter onto the polished mahogany table. It slid across the surface and stopped inches from my hand. "Is this a joke?" "Mom," she snapped, her voice tight and high. "A cease and desist. You are suing your own daughter for— What is this financial exploitation?" Mark sat next to her, looking less aggressive and more confused. He kept glancing at Sarah, who sat at the head of the table, calm and impartial in her navy suit. "It is not a joke. Rachel," I said softly. My voice was steady. I did not feel the familiar urge to soothe her. It is an invitation to settle this before it becomes a matter of public record. Settle what? Rachel laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "The house is mine. You signed it over. It is done. We are closing tomorrow." "We are not closing tomorrow," Sarah interrupted, her tone professional but sharp as a razor. "We have filed a motion to freeze the asset pending an investigation into undue influence and fraud. The title company has already been notified. The sale is dead in the water until this is resolved." Rachel stood up, her hands trembling. "You can't do that. Mark needs that money. The car is already ordered. Sit down." "Mrs. Whitman," Sarah commanded. It was not a request. Rachel hesitated, then sank back into her chair. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for the first time. "Mom, please, stop this. You are ruining everything." I reached for the binder Mr. Miller had given me. I opened it slowly. The sound of the metal rings snapping open echoed in the silent room. I pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it toward her. "Do you remember November 14th? 2 years ago, I asked—" Rachel frowned. "I don't know." "Why, you called me at midnight." I continued, locking eyes with her. "You were crying. You said Mark had a dental emergency. You said he was in agony and you didn't have the insurance coverage. You asked for $3,000. I sent it within the hour. I skipped my heart medication that month to make sure my account didn't overdraw." So Rachel crossed her arms. "We paid the dentist. What is your point?" I slid the second piece of paper across the table. It was the credit card statement from the Grand Resort and Spa, dated November 15th. There was no dentist. "Rachel," I said. "There was a 2-night stay in a luxury suite. There was champagne. There were massages." The color drained from Rachel's face. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Mark leaned forward. He snatched the paper from the table. He stared at it, his brow furrowing. "Wait," Mark said, his voice low. "I never had a root canal 2 years ago. I was at a conference in Chicago. You told me your mother sent that money as a birthday gift for you. She lied to both of us." "Mark," I said. I pulled out another sheet. "And last July, the transmission repair for the car, $1,500. Here is the receipt for a Louis Vuitton handbag purchased the same day." I laid out the evidence, piece by piece. The fake medical bills, the imaginary car repairs, the heating bills that were actually down payments for vacations. It was a mosaic of betrayal. Rachel stared at the table, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Stop it," she screamed, slamming her hand down. "Stop it. I took care of you. I visited you. I deserve that money." "You didn't take care of me," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "You harvested me." Mark was silent. He was reading the pages, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He looked at his wife, and I saw the realization hit him. He had thought I was a burden. Now he saw that I was the bank that had been funding the lifestyle he thought he was providing. "This constitutes a pattern of elder financial abuse," Sarah stated, folding her hands. "If we go to court, we will seek to annul the transfer of the house based on fraud and undue influence. We will also seek restitution for the $45,000 Mrs. Whitman has loaned you under false pretenses. And given the evidence, the district attorney might be interested in the criminal aspect of the fraud." Rachel looked at Sarah, then at me. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. "Mom," she stammered, tears spilling over her lashes. "Mom, you wouldn't put me in jail. I'm your daughter." "You are." I agreed. "But I am done being your victim. So here is the choice." I pushed a document toward her. It was a deed transfer, prepared by Sarah earlier that morning. "You sign the house back to me, today, right now. You walk away. We never speak of the money you stole again. The lawsuit disappears." "And if I don't," Rachel whispered, "then we go to court." I said, "And I will let the judge decide what a daughter who steals from her widowed mother deserves." The room was silent. The air conditioning hummed. Rachel looked at Mark, but he turned his head away, refusing to meet her eyes. She was alone. For the first time in her life, she was completely, utterly alone with the consequences of her actions. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so violently that the tip tapped against the paper like a nervous heartbeat. She looked at me one last time, waiting for me to save her, waiting for me to say it was all a mistake. I just watched her. I did not blink. "Sign it?" I said. Rachel pressed the pen so hard against the paper that I thought the tip might snap. She signed her name with a jerky, angry motion, surrendering the deed back to me. The room was quiet, save for the scratching of the nib. When she finished, she did not look at me. She pushed the document away as if it were contaminated. "Are you happy now?" she whispered, her voice thick with tears she refused to shed. "You got what you wanted. You won. I didn't win." "Rachel," I replied, taking the document. "I just stopped losing." Mark stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket, but the arrogance was gone. He looked tired. He looked at Rachel with an expression I recognized. It was the look of a man realizing he had bought a ticket for a train that was going nowhere. "I will be in the car," Mark said. He did not wait for her. He walked out of the conference room without looking back. Rachel flinched as the door clicked shut. The cracks in their marriage were no longer hairline fractures. They were gaping chasms. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. In a small town like ours, secrets have a way of leaking out like water through a cracked pipe. People began to talk. They whispered about why the Whitman house was pulled from the market so abruptly. They whispered about the shouting matches heard from Rachel's apartment. The image of the successful power couple shattered. Mark lost the investors for his Detroit venture once the rumors of financial instability surfaced. Rachel stopped posting on social media. Her curated life had collapsed under the weight of the truth. Everyone expected me to move back into the 2-story wooden house. They expected me to unpack my china, hang my curtains, and resume my life as the widow on the hill. But I could not go back. I drove past the house one afternoon. I sat in my car and looked at the porch where I used to drink my coffee. It did not look like a sanctuary anymore. It looked like a crime scene. The walls remembered the betrayal. The kitchen remembered the eviction notice. I called a real estate agent the next morning, not the one Rachel had used. "You want to sell it?" the agent asked, surprised. "But Mrs. Whitman, you fought so hard to get it back." "I fought for the asset," I told her. "I did not fight for the memories. Put it on the market. I want a quick sale." The house sold in 2 weeks. The market was hot, and a young family from Chicago fell in love with the garden I had planted. I signed the closing papers without a single pang of regret. The check was for $450,000. Combined with the survivor benefit fund I had recovered, I was not just solvent, I was wealthy. I did not buy a mansion. I did not buy a luxury car. I bought a small, single-story cottage in a gated community 2 towns over. It was a place designed for active adults, quiet and impeccably landscaped. The cottage had 2 bedrooms, a sunroom for reading, and a small patch of garden that would not require hours of raking in the autumn. I moved in on a Tuesday. The neighbours waved as the movers carried in my new furniture. I had left the old, heavy oak pieces behind. I wanted everything new. Light woods, soft colours, modern lines. "Welcome to the neighbourhood," a woman called out from across the low fence. She was holding a gardening trowel. "I am Linda, Unit 4B. "Hello?" "Linda?" I said, smiling. "I am Eleanor." She did not know my history. She did not know I was the woman whose daughter had tried to make her homeless. She did not know about the lawsuit or the scandal. To her, I was just Eleanor, a nice lady with a sensible car and a fresh start. I unpacked my boxes in the silence of my new living room. It was a different kind of silence than before. It was not the heavy, suffocating silence of abandonment. It was the peaceful, airy silence of freedom. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the sunroom. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the manicured lawn. I took a sip. It tasted better than any coffee I had ever brewed in the old house. I had closed the door on the past. I felt no anger toward Rachel, only a distant pity. She was still trapping herself in a web of expectations and debts, while I was sitting here, finally, completely free. I had wiped the slate clean. This was not an ending. It was the first breath of air I had taken in 30 years. The alarm clock on my bedside table was set for 7 o'clock, but I was already awake. I lay there for a moment, listening. In my old life, the silence of the morning used to fill me with a low-level anxiety, a nagging feeling that I was forgetting to do something for someone else. Was Rachel's laundry done? Did I thaw the chicken for dinner now? The silence was different. It was not empty. It was spacious. It was a blank canvas waiting for me to pick up a brush. I got up and walked into my kitchen. I made tea. Not coffee. Because I discovered 2 weeks ago that I actually preferred Earl Grey. But I had spent 20 years drinking dark roast because that was what my husband and Rachel liked. "To me," I whispered, raising the mug to the sunlight streaming through the window. I had built a new routine, one that revolved entirely around my own curiosity. At 10 o'clock, I walked to the community centre for my watercolour class. I had always wanted to paint, but there was never time between working at the institute and raising a child alone. Now, time was the only thing I had in abundance. I sat next to Linda, my neighbour. She was struggling with a landscape of the lake. "I can't get the blue right," Linda groaned, dropping her brush. "It looks like mud." "Eleanor, How do you get yours so transparent? I looked at my paper. The colours were bleeding into each other, soft and uncontrolled. I stopped trying to force the water to go where I wanted. I said, dipping my brush. I just let it find its own path. It knows where it needs to go. Linda laughed. Are we talking about paint, or are we talking about life? Maybe both. I smiled. After class, we went for lunch at a small bistro in town. I ordered the spicy Thai salad. I used to cook meatloaf and mashed potatoes because Rachel was a picky eater. I realized I didn't even like meatloaf. You look good. Eleanor, Linda said, leaning over her sandwich. When you first moved in, you looked like you were holding your breath. Now you look like you are finally exhaling. I think I am, I admitted. For a long time, I thought my value was measured by how much I could endure for other people. I thought being a good mother meant erasing myself so my daughter could shine. I thought that was strength. I paused, tracing the rim of my glass. But Linda asked, "But it wasn't strength," I said, my voice firm. It was fear. I was afraid that if I stopped giving, I wouldn't be loved. I realized I wasn't weak. Linda, you have to be incredibly strong to carry a grown woman on your back for a decade. My strength wasn't the problem. My judgment was. I poured my love into a cup that had a hole in the bottom. My phone buzzed in my purse. A month ago, that sound would have made my heart race. I would have scrambled to answer it, terrified that Rachel needed me, terrified that she was angry. Now, I let it buzz. I finished my salad. I took a sip of water. Only then did I check the screen. It was a spam call. I deleted it without a second thought. I had stopped waiting. That was the biggest change. I was no longer a woman in a waiting room, hoping for my number to be called by a daughter who only remembered my name when she needed a check. That evening, I sat on my patio. The air was cool. I had a stack of brochures on the table next to me. Italy, France, Japan, places I had read about in books but never thought I would see. I picked up the one for a culinary tour of Tuscany. Why not? I said aloud to the empty garden. I was 56 years old. Society told women my age that we were invisible, that our best years were behind us, buried under family obligations and careers. But as I watched the fireflies dancing above the grass, I knew that was a lie. I was healthy. I was independent. I had $1 million in the bank and a passport I needed to renew. I was not fading away. I was just coming into focus. This was not the end of the story. It was the very first page. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, 3 months after I had settled into the cottage, when the doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. I was midway through packing a suitcase for my trip to Italy, folding linen trousers and humming along to a jazz record. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. It was Rachel. She did not look like the woman who had evicted me. Her expensive coat was soaked through. Her hair was plastered to her skull, and her mascara had run down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She looked small. She looked shipwrecked. I opened the door. "Mom." She choked out, her voice trembling against the sound of the rain. "Mom." "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She walked into my living room, dripping water onto the floor I had just cleaned. I did not rush to get a towel. I stood by the door, my hand still resting on the knob. "Mark left," she said, staring at her wet shoes. He filed for divorce yesterday. He took the car. He emptied the joint account. The landlord gave me an eviction notice this morning because the rent is 2 months behind. Mom, I have nothing. I have absolutely nothing. She looked up at me then, her eyes red and desperate. I am so sorry. She sobbed, her body shaking. I was stupid. I was so stupid. You were right about everything. Please, I just need a place to stay. Just until I get back on my feet. I can sleep on the sofa. I won't be a burden. I promise. I looked at my daughter. The maternal instinct, buried deep in my biology, tried to flare up. It wanted me to wrap her in a blanket, make her soup, and tell her I would fix it. That was the old Eleanor. That was the Eleanor who set herself on fire to keep others warm. But I was not that woman anymore. I looked at the suitcase on my dining table. I looked at the passport sitting on top of it. Then I looked back at the woman who had given me 3 days to pack my entire life into boxes. I am sorry to hear that. Rachel, I said. My voice was calm. It lacked the jagged edge of anger, but it had the density of stone. But you cannot stay here. Rachel froze. She looked as if I had slapped her. What she whispered. But, where am I supposed to go? You have a spare room. I am your daughter. You are a 34-year-old woman. I corrected her gentle. You made choices. You chose a husband over a mother. You chose money over loyalty. And when you gambled my home to buy a lifestyle you couldn't afford, you made it very clear that we are separate entities. But I said I was sorry, she cried, her voice rising to a shriek. Doesn't that matter? Doesn't an apology mean anything? It means you are sorry you got caught. I said. It means you are sorry the money ran out. It does not mean you have changed. If I let you in now, Rachel, I am not helping you. I am enabling you. I am teaching you that you can burn bridges and still expect people to swim across the river to save you. I walked to the door and held it open. The rain was still falling in sheets outside. You are smart, I told her. You are capable. You will figure it out. But you will do it without my checkbook and without my roof. You are cruel, she hissed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. I never thought you could be this cold. I am not cold, I replied. I am just finally respecting myself enough to say no. Rachel stared at me for a long moment, searching for a crack in the armor. She found none. She turned and walked out into the rain. She did not look back. I watched her get into her old sedan, the one she had looked down on, and drive away. I closed the door. I locked it. I walked back to the dining table and picked up my passport. I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. It was not the peace of indifference. It was the peace of resolution. I had broken the cycle. I had refused to be the victim or the savior. I was just Eleanor. And for the first time in 56 years, that was enough. I zipped up my suitcase. My flight to Florence left in the morning. I was ready to fly. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Drop a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. I really enjoy reading about where our community is tuning in from around the world. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more realistic dramas like this, please make sure to subscribe to the Nora Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button. And if you are feeling generous, smash that hype button to help this story reach more people. See you in the next video.